right, well, good morning again, and happy Sabbath. I apologize that we don't have any slides up here today, but once again, technology is not our friend today. But the sermon today is called Love on the Brain. And I've heard lots of sermons about love, and it gets into a lot of the theological perspectives of it, which I guess it should do because we're a church and I'm giving a sermon on it. But I want to go a different route today. I want to talk more about the neurophysiology of love, because here's what as I've researched this and I've listened to many of these neurophysiologists talk, and they talk about love from an evolutionary perspective, right? Because love exists and the hormones that are produced, and we're going to get into the love potion, if you will, in just a minute. But they're produced in what people call the reptilian part of the human brain. That's subcortical. It's below the cognition areas. It's in the very base part of our brain. That love is this base thing that's come along as a part of evolution. And I agree with them that ability to love, that need for love, is built into the core of us. It's hardwired into our brains, but not because of evolution. It's that way because we are created in the image of God. And God doesn't love, right? God is love. It is God's nature is love. And if I'm created in the image of God and his character is love, then I am hardwired in my brain to love. Have you ever seen this where an animal, they'll be born and nobody has to teach them, but they know certain behaviors and habits that identify them as that particular mammal or that animal, right? And that is hardwired into their brain. I refer to it as the ROM chip in our brains. And when we were created by God, this hardwiring came in. So we say this thing, we throw this phrase around. We say, oh, love is all you need, like it's some kind of just a nice statement that we make. But it's not just a feeling, right? There's a lot of chemistry, and it's pretty sophisticated chemistry that we have to deal with when we talk about love. And what blows my mind every time I think about this is that every time we experience this new relationship area, our bodies release a huge amount of chemicals, neurotransmitters. And we're going to get into that a little bit today and talk about how loving other people is a result of how God has loved us first and what's been input into our brains. The opening verse is Psalm 139:14, and it says, "Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it." Let's pray. Oh, Lord, so grateful for all the blessings that you've given us, and I ask now that you would be with me as I speak today, that it would be your words and not mine that we talk about here today. I pray in your precious name. Amen. Amen. So here's, I think, where the big confusion comes. When people say, oh, I fell in love with someone, we speak as though we are the originators of that love. But we're not. We're responders to that love. We are responding to something that is already innate within our characters, within who we are. And we know this because when a baby is born, it's not taught or educated in any areas, but it acts in certain ways. It cries when it's hungry or when it's cold or when it's not feeling well. Actually, they cry at everything because that's their initial response to everything. But as they begin to grow, they begin to form these ideas, and we don't have to train them to do that. And a baby learns this bonding love from its mother from the production of something called oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone, which is produced in an area of the brain called the ventricular integral area. And we begin to produce these love hormones. And the child, this baby, begins to bond with the mother, and the mother bonds with the child in the same way because of the release of these hormones just from things like eye contact and touch. Now, this love potion that we talk about is made up of dopamine, which is a motivation molecule. That's the I feel really good hormone. There's oxytocin, which is primarily involved in forming relationships and bonding with other people. You've heard of what's called bro love, right? Guys, like, yeah, that's oxytocin that we bond with. Not so much the dopamine, but the oxytocin. Vasopressin, which begins to occur more as relationships mature and we feel safe and comfortable. It lowers our blood pressure. It normalizes our heart rate. There is serotonin. Now, when we fall in love and the oxytocin and dopamine begin to get released quickly in the initial infatuation phases of the relationship, our serotonin levels also become reduced as well. And what happens in low serotonin levels, you'll see in people who are obsessive compulsive. So we become obsessed with the person, or if you get a puppy dog or a kitten or whatever. There's also something called norepinephrine, and what that does is that creates all that excitement and energy. Let's go do something. You know, you meet someone for the first time. Let's go climb Mount Everest together. That'll be so much fun, you know, and we can go do that. And that comes from this norepinephrine part of it. And then you have these endorphins, which are these natural feel-good opioids, actually, that are released during a physical affection and emotional bonding with people. So here's the thing you need to know. There's a saying, and it goes that your brain doesn't know the difference between your boss or a bear. You know what that means? When we talk in neurophysiology, what it means is that when a person gets the excitatory state of fight or freeze or flight, right? Fight or flight is what we normally call it. That it is the same physiological response as to whether your boss is yelling at you or you're being attacked by a bear. Your body doesn't know the difference between those. And your body doesn't know the difference between a good relationship or a bad relationship. All it knows is that it's a relationship and it's releasing all of these hormones at the same time. You know what else causes the same construct of the release of these hormones? This feel-good stuff, the pleasure center of the brain is stimulated by? Cocaine does the exact same thing. When they do functional MRI studies, people who do cocaine experience the same brain stimulation that somebody who falls in love or becomes infatuated with someone or lusts after something or someone for the first time. It's the same thing that happens to us. So the problem is, and the other part of it is that, I don't know if you guys experience this, but it can be exhausting, right? All of these neurotransmitters, hormones that are released into the brain, are exhausting and they wear the system down. Now, evolutionary speaking, you would think that this would be a good thing for the body, because if you're an evolutionist, if you believe in the idea of pure procreation of the species, then it would be better for men to be in this excitatory state all the time, because then they would be able to use the word breed with or procreate with as many women as possible in as short a time as possible in order to produce as many offspring as possible, right? Isn't that sort of the concept behind evolution and how it works? But you can't sustain that. It is better for the body and for the brain to be in a long-term, sustained relationship. And how did God intend for us to form our relationships? Was it that we would become one every couple weeks with someone else? Or is it that we would bond with one person and that would be our lifelong mate? Because marriage is a type of our marriage to Jesus. And we are, when we form that relationship, how many of you remember how excited you were when you first discovered Jesus? Remember that? That feeling of you just want to go out and tell everybody about it? And then eventually it levels off. We still want to be witnesses and we still want to share our story and our experiences with people. But if we were in that pink cloud excitatory state all the time, we would burn out. There'd be nothing left of us after a while. So God has this perfect plan, and what he's done is he's created this perfect blueprint for us. This whole process isn't some accident from evolution. These are intricate systems, and they require an enormous amount of chemical orchestration. I don't know how else to say that. God didn't command love. He built us for love, right? We're engineered to be able to, what is one of the great commands is to love your neighbor, right? You love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love is something that's innate and programmed into us. And the downside of it is, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, is that when people are subjected to trauma, it rewires their brain, and the ability to love and form relationships begins to get compromised. 1 John 4:8 says, "But anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love." In Genesis 1:27, it says, "So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them." Sorry, I'm trying to get past my technical problems again here. In Mind, Character, and Personality, Volume 1, Miss White writes this: God is love. His nature, his law is love. It ever has been. It ever will be. Every manifestation of creative power is an expression of infinite love. Well, so we have this chemistry of divine connection, and it's called oxytocin. It's called the bonding hormone most of the time. And it's released during physical touch, eye contact, any kind of meaningful connection. Bible study, actually, with other believers will produce oxytocin, and we begin to bond with those people. It creates trust and empathy and attachments to other people. You know, it's interesting. We find it with our pets as well. How many people have ever owned a dog, right? Well, when you get that puppy, or even if you get a rescue, the studies that they've done on dogs, I don't know about cats, because cats are just like having a mean roommate all the time, as far as I'm concerned. I know cat lovers are going to hate me for that, but with a dog in particular, when you get eye contact with that dog and you speak softly to it, the dog's brain produces oxytocin. This is how dogs bond to human beings, is that way. It's interesting because you could say terrible things to that dog, but it doesn't understand the language. But if you say them in a soft voice, you know, "Oh, you're such a bad dog. Oh, you're so stupid. Oh, I just want to hang you up by your legs. You've been such a bad dog." And you say it in this beautiful, nice, soft voice with making eye contact, the dog will produce this oxytocin. And people will too, and we begin to bond with the animals that way. The main point is that oxytocin is released through touch, through eye contact. It's not random biology, guys. God designed it this way so that we could find a way to bond with other human beings. Ecclesiastes 4:12 says, "A person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken." In 1 Corinthians 12:27 we read, "All you together are Christ's body, and each of you is a part of it." So we are created in order to form this community that we have here, whether it's our church or a larger community of fellow believers. Hebrews 10:24 and 25 says, "Let's think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another." You know what I love about potlucks is a place where we build those bonds. And the brain, you know, if we could all undergo functional MRIs during our potluck, which I don't know how we would do that, but you would see that it was the pleasure centers in the brain that were being activated as we form relationships. And I get excited about it. You know, we're going to hang out with everybody. it's unfortunate that sometimes church ends early and then we go about our way, right? I wonder about in the New Testament church when they all kind of lived together, more communal, and they took care of each other and they shared in everything. If that wasn't intended that way in order to avoid the sort of separation that we find in society today. That's one of the hard parts about social media, right? Is that oxytocin, which creates this bond and this trust in the relationships between people, doesn't really form in social media because it requires eye contact. It requires physical touch. It requires that we're close to each other in order to do it. Now, then there's dopamine. Dopamine creates feelings of pleasure, motivation. It actually causes us to seek relationships. So dopamine is really the addictive part of these hormones. When you use drugs, cocaine as an example, you produce all this dopamine. It's a feel-good thing, and then we strive for it. That's how addiction, one of the ways that addiction forms. There's more brain physiology behind that as far as building neuroreceptors go. But we seek that feeling all the time. This is why breakups are so hard. It's interesting. How many of you have ever been dumped by someone you actually loved? Okay. How many of you have ever dumped anyone that you actually loved, that loved you, I mean? Yeah, okay. So it goes both ways. But when you get dumped by someone that you're actually in love with, that ventricular tegumentary area in the brain that stimulates the production of these chemicals like dopamine. Yeah, a water, if you don't mind, Bonita, I'm sorry. It actually continues to produce these hormones, which is why after a bad breakup, sometimes you just can obsessively think about that person. That's all you can do. Have you ever experienced that, right? And you know what else happens during this time? The prefrontal cortex shuts down. And what does the prefrontal cortex do? It's the area where we're making good decisions. We're using logic. Lucas, can you pop that for me? I can't. Thank you, sir. And what we use to make good choices and good decisions in our lives. So, how many of you have seen people? They're in a relationship, good or bad, and they make bad decisions, right? We become disinhibited. We're willing to take more risks than we do. Unfortunately, the people who are in bad relationships, even when there's spousal abuse that goes on, they stay in those relationships because of the production. There's this addiction that forms as a result of that. That's why I'm telling you that as far as the brain chemistry goes, the brain doesn't know the difference, or our bodies don't know the difference between a good relationship and a bad relationship. But we're given guidance about that, aren't we? And where does that come from? The Bible tells us how to treat each other and how our relationships should go. Psalm 37:4 says, "Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desires." We don't look to other people in order to get the things that we need. We bond with other people because it's part of God's plan, but we get the things we need directly from God. And if we take that other person and we make them a God in our lives, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Proverbs 27:17 says, "As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend." Romans 12:10 says, "To love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other." What does that sound like? It sounds like this pleasure center that we're talking about, the production of these neurochemicals that are being produced in our brains. In Steps to Christ, Ellen White writes this: "It is not earthly rank, nor birth, nor nationality, nor religious privilege which proves that we are members of the family of God. It is love. A love that embraces all humanity." I think it's God that made love addictive. I really do. I mean, by the pure neurophysiological definition, what happens when we fall in love with someone or build a relationship with someone, it is defined by this addictive behavior. And love is addicting. We seek that from other people, affection, unless we've been damaged. And if we've been damaged, God allows for a restorative part of our lives where we can come back to where we were. So there's another one, a drug or chemical called vasopressin, and something called long-term oxytocin. What that does is it creates these lasting attachments. So, initially I think the period is called cathexis. There's a lust part of it, and then there's that energetic love part of it. And eventually, over long term, we settle into a long, trusting relationship with another person. And vasopressin is one of the neurotransmitters that is released at that point. And what that does is it's called the neurotransmitter of commitment. And what it does is it allows us to feel safe and comfortable with another person. So if you were to take a look and get the vital signs of someone who's experiencing sort of a new relationship, their blood pressure's up, their pulse rate's elevated, their cardiac markers would be different. Over a long term, that vasopressin helps to control that. So there's an architecture behind this attachment that God gives us. In Ruth 1:16, remember the story, Ruth said, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back." She was going to be left alone. "Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." 2 Corinthians 13:7-8 said, "Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance." Now, how's that possible? From an evolutionary standpoint, what is the purpose of having that long-term relationship like that? Right? Because eventually we get to a point where procreation isn't an option anymore. So what is the evolutionary purpose behind love and attachment to other people? Joe?
That's to keep the right path through life. The right path.
That's right. That's right. The right path through life.
Love, wrong.
Because are we meant to be alone, Joe? No, we're not. We're not. But some people are, because in their youth they were abandoned, or they were subject to sexual trauma or sexual abuse. I saw this thing maybe last week, and it just broke my heart. And the lady asked this question. There was a whole auditorium of people, maybe 500 people. And she said, if you have been sexually abused, or you know someone that was sexually abused in your life, please stand up. Every single person in that room stood up. And I thought about, how is that even possible? How is it that if we're created for love, how is it possible that there is that kind of abuse? And that's where sin comes into the picture. Sin and the nature of sin and the behaviors that it produces, and people, Satan gets his way in there, and people become abused, and the brain rewires itself, and the ability to produce these pleasure chemicals goes away. And if a relationship doesn't do anything to produce like the dopamine or the oxytocin or the vasopressin, these chemicals that form this addictive process, then where's the motivation to be in a relationship with someone? And that's where pornography becomes rampant, because it's a way to get the pleasure centers activated in the brain without actually having to form a relationship or to have a long-term commitment. It's really sad the way that the system works. But that's what sin has done. And what happens to people in that place? Well, God has a way out for them. It's a restorative plan through prayer and submission, and through building a relationship with Jesus. We learn to build relationships with other people. Malachi 2:16 says, "For I hate divorce, says the Lord, the God of Israel. To divorce your wife is to overwhelm her with cruelty, says the Lord of heaven's armies." So guard your heart and do not be unfaithful. So when the system breaks down, this is what we're talking about: trauma, stress, destructive patterns. They disrupt the oxytocin production. They damage the dopamine pathways. I'm not talking about the fact that people just make a choice, they don't want to do this anymore. I'm telling you that if you look at these functional MRIs, you will find that the actual structure of the brain changes. Certain parts of the brain begin to diminish, other parts begin to grow larger. Addiction, abuse, broken relationships, they just rewire the brain. And it doesn't work the way that it was supposed to be. And it's sin. Sin literally damages our love systems. You ever thought about that? It's not just the harm that it does, I guess, to the things that we do and what we say, but trauma and abuse and addiction and broken relationships that come from sin make it impossible for some people to be able to love anymore. It doesn't just break people's hearts, you know? It breaks the neural pathways that make it possible to love. Romans 1:28-29 says, since they thought it foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that never should have been done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. When we allow Satan into our lives, we lose that ability to be able to communicate or to form relationships with other people. In 2 Timothy 3:2-4 says, for people will love only themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. They will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. In the Great Controversy, Ellen White puts it this way: it is Satan's constant effort to misrepresent the character of God, the nature of sin, and the real issues at stake in the Great Controversy. He causes them to cherish false conceptions of God so that they regard him with fear and hate rather than with love. So there's two parts to this now. We have a stress response and we have a love response. When you first fall in love, you form a new relationship or attachment. Your brain initially treats it as a stress response, right? You know that? Because of the norepinephrine release and cortisol. And again, it's the body responds in the same way it would to fear. Isn't that crazy? You fall in love, you form a relationship, there's a huge amount of stress on the body. That's why I believe God designed us for long-term relationships, so that we don't have to go through this over and over and over again. In fact, I know people, they've been hurt so many times in relationships, as far as they're concerned, they'll spend the rest of their lives alone. It's easier to do that. I met this guy at, I can't remember where I was, but I was out walking Gracie, and he had his dog, and we started talking. And he said that dog was his whole life, that he'll never be in a relationship again. He's had nothing but disappointments with humans, but never had a disappointment with his dog. And so he has formed a bond with his dog that, in my opinion, is unhealthy because it's to the exclusion of a relationship with other people. That chronic stress and that cortisol production, it interferes with the oxytocin production. So we can't bond with other people. We can't form those relationships. 1 John 4:18 says, such love is no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment. And this shows that we have not fully experienced his perfect love. So when people talk about fearing God, are they talking about being afraid of God? No, it's about the respect and being in awe of God's power and his majesty. If we're afraid of God, and there are people that are, there are religions that teach you to be afraid of God. And in those situations, you can't form other healthy relationships with other people because you haven't formed a healthy relationship with God. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. There's a reference in this neuroscience research study that I wrote, and it says you can say, or that I read, you can say that love begins as a stressor, but then love becomes a buffer against stress. Remember, long-term relationships will produce a higher level of vasopressin. And when that happens, your body begins to settle into a more stable place, and the stressors don't affect you in the same ways. So what do we do? Well, if we've been damaged or hurt and we find it that we can't form relationships with other people, God has a restorative way to fix this. He can restore the damage, and our brains can rewire themselves again. Ezekiel 36:26 says, "And I will give you a new heart." That's a promise that we get from God. So if we've been hurt and traumatized and damaged throughout our lives, people have been subject to abuse in any form, and the brain rewires and we can't find the ability to form these relationships anymore, God promises that he will give us a new heart. And he says, I will put a new spirit in you. I will take out your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. Romans 12:2 says, this is 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, this means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person, that the old life is gone and a new life has begun. So there's two types of loves that I wanted to address quickly. One is called sacrificial love, and the other is selfish love. So true love involves both reward, right, which as we talked about was dopamine and oxytocin, but it also emphasizes the other person's well-being as well. So when we're out trying to just feed our own pleasure center, that's a selfish way to do things. We're just interested in ourselves and how we feel. But in a relationship with other people, the goal is not just to focus on ourselves, but the goal is to be able to make sure that that their well-being is being addressed as well. John 15:13 says, there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friend. 1 Corinthians 13:4 and 5 says, love is patient and kind. It's not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable and keeps no record of being wronged. I was told once that sometimes in a relationship, a person doesn't get hysterical, they get historical. Philippians 2:3-4 says, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others as well. So physical touch, quality time, acts of service, prayer, they all trigger healthy love responses. The reason I'm talking to you about this today is it's my opinion. You can disagree. My opinion is that the more we understand about how our brains and our bodies work, the easier it is to understand what God's law means to each of us. If we have an idea of what love does to us and how we respond to it, I think it makes it easier, at least for me, to form relationships because I have a better understanding of how that works. I heard someone say, they said, now that you know how God designed love to work, I'm paraphrasing, you can live in partnership with your own brain chemistry. It's basically what it's about. 1 John 4:19 and 21 says, we love each other because he loved us first. And let's not just throw that around, okay? Because we say that all the time. Well, I can love Jesus because Jesus loved me first. So that if I'm in a relationship with someone else, I can love that person because they loved me first. But that is the origination concept of sin. And remember, that's not where it comes from. We don't create love. Love does not originate within us, even in a one-on-one relationship. We are simply responding to something that has already been hardwired into our brains from creation. Remember, I am created in the image of God. and God is love. If someone says, I love God, but hates a fellow believer, that person is a liar. For if we don't love people we can see, how can we love God, whom we cannot see? And he has given us the command, those who love God must also love their neighbors or their fellow believers. Colossians 3:14 says, above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And 1 Peter 4:8 says, most important of all, continue to show deep love for each other, for love covers a multitude of sins. In conclusion, so here we are. Maybe I can't present it the way I want to, because it's such a complex area. You know, we have a sermon for 30 or 40 minutes. It's difficult to get into the real details of how this all works. And I'm still totally blown away by this. I love to study neuroscience, right? Especially the neuroscience of our behaviors, of love in particular, because I thought I was just going to find some real interesting facts and stuff. But, you know, it was more than that. What I discovered was was that God's been leaving these fingerprints on me all my life, and I just didn't realize it until I got older. Somehow, until I got into a relationship with Jesus, I didn't understand what it meant to build relationships with other people. I'm going to close with something from Christ's Object Lessons. This is pages 415 and 416. It says, those who wait for the bridegroom's coming are to say to the people, behold your God. The last rays of merciful light, the last message of mercy to be given to the world, is a revelation of his character of love. The children of God are to manifest his glory. In their own life and character, they are to reveal what the grace of God has done for them. Amen? And I'd love to go on with this. I'd love to spend the next 3 hours. If my slides work, it'd be even better, because I have diagrams of how this works in the human brain and the areas of the brain, and you can see where this comes from. I would encourage you to spend some time studying this a little bit, because it's just fascinating. It will help you in your own relationships with other people. And if you've been subject to trauma and you find relationships difficult with other people, then there is this restorative way that you can come back to it. And that's by going back to our original love relationship with Jesus. You remember that, right? You remember that first experience? Sometimes we have to go back to the beginning in order to get that back. So thank you.